Welcome everybody to our presentation about pragmatics. For the introduction, I'm going to start talking about a term called deixis. Deixis is a technical term for one of the most basic things we do with utterances. It means pointing via language. Any linguistic form we use to accomplish this is called deictic expressions. For example, if you ask "What's that?" you're using a deictic expression "that" to indicate something in the immediate context. These expressions are sometimes called indexicals, usually spoken by very young children. They can be used to indicate via person deixis me, you, to indicate location via spatial deixis here, there, or to indicate time via temporal deixis now, then. All these expressions depend, for their interpretation, on the speaker and hearer sharing the same context. Within the context, it is important to clarify the most basic distinction between deictic expressions being near speaker versus away from the speaker. The near speaker or proximal terms are this, here, and now, and are typically interpreted in terms of location, or the deictic center, referring to some point or period in time. The away from speaker or distant terms are that, there, and then, and can simply indicate away from speaker.
Now we are going to describe the first deictic expression, person deixis. Speech events includes at least two persons, the speaker I and the addressee you. Each person in a conversation shifts from being I to being you constantly.
Fergasuta, you and I are going to make history.
We are going to see that person deixis operates on a basis of three-part division. First person as I, second person as you, and third person as she, he, or it.
Here he comes!
In this extract, we can see clearly the division. Speaker A and B are talking about a third person, he. In many languages, these deictic categories of speaker and addressee and others are elaborated with markers of social status. Expressions which indicate higher status are described as honorifics. The discussion of the circumstances which lead to the choice of one of these forms rather than another is described as social deixis.
Mr. Kinnaird, will the Old Etonians take the Football Association Cup this year?
This extract shows clearly the social deixis. Finally, there is in English an exclusive we and an inclusive we. The first one includes speaker and other, but includes the addressee, and the inclusive we includes speaker, addressee, and other.
We pass, we move, we pass again. Space.
But that's not how we play.
Here, in this extract, speaker A is using an inclusive we, while speaker B is using an exclusive we.
We'll continue with spatial deixis. To spatial deixis, the concept of distance is clearly relevant. Contemporary English makes use of two adverbs, here and there, to point the relative location between people and the things indicated.
Put you in here.
Some verbs of motion, like come and go, are used to mark movement towards the speaker or away from the speaker.
Here he comes!
The first notion of movement that children learn has to do with becoming visible. If it can be seen, they use words like this and here. The use of that and there are associated with things that move out of the child's visual space, can no longer be seen.
What do you make of this, lads?
You'd think the Queen lived here.
Something important about spatial deixis is that location, from the speaker's perspective, can be fixed mentally and physically. For example, when the speaker says, "I'll come later," they are projecting themselves into a location before actually being there. This is called deictic projection. Now look at this other example.
What am I missing up there?
This is called psychological distance. Objects that are physically close will be treated by the speaker as psychologically close, and the same if the object is distant. At the same time, the speaker may also mark something that is physically close as psychologically distant.
Let's talk about temporal deixis expressions. These are used to indicate time.
The indexical now is a proximal term. so it's near the speaker. And then it's a distal term, so it's away from the speaker. Let's see an example.
Who are the new lads then? No idea. Not from round here, that's for sure. We're not Milwaukee either. Why is Ward gone and brought me here then?
Also, then, in contrast to now or here, applies to both past and future time. For example, I was in Scotland then would be past time and I'll see you then would be future time. In turn, the proximal form now can indicate either the time the speakers are making an utterance or the time the listeners are hearing the utterance. We also use elaborate systems of non-deictic temporal reference, such as calendar time. For example, on the 22nd of July, I was in Berlin. Or we have clock time. For example, back in half an hour. These forms, however, are learned a lot later than those deictic expressions. Yesterday, tomorrow, today, tonight, this week, next week, last week, just to name a few examples.
Got any new jerseys, lads? Finished them off last night?
The basic distinctions presented so far for person, spatial, and temporal deixis can all be seen at work in one of the most common distinctions made in the English grammar, that between direct and indirect or reported speech. Deictic expressions are interpreted within the same context as the speaker who utters. When the context shifts to one in which a previous utterance was reported, the proximal forms shift to the corresponding distal forms.
Will you go on with this once your child arrives?
I hadn't given it much thought.
Okay, so if I had to report that question, I would say his father asked him if he would go on with the football thing, once his child arrived. So you see, the proximal deictic forms of direct speech communicate a sense of being in the same context, whereas the distal deictic forms of indirect speech make the original speech event seem more remote. So the interpretation of deictic expressions depends on the context, the speaker's intention, they express relative distance, and they always communicate much more than is said.